this, and that these chemicals that are causing the autoimmune response are burning out all these different, and they're like, well, you're not a doctor. And I'm like, I'm not a doctor. I'm saying the doctors are saying this, and they look at me like I'm crazy.
Right. Well, you know, the first thing you have to realize is that when physicians go to medical school, when I went to medical school, there was virtually no instructions on vaccines. You took a 2-week immunology course. You know, they're pretty intense, but it was just 2 weeks long, and that was your exposure to immunology. Well, you hardly had any time to learn about the intricacies of vaccines. I doubt that there's much more instruction today. You learn a lot about the mechanism of immune reaction, but you're not taught about vaccines in specific. So physicians generally don't know a lot about it, and they're not going to the scientific literature researching these things, looking at these things. And the vast majority of physicians know absolutely nothing about neuroscience. And so when you start talking about microglia being activated and excitotoxicity and immune reactions in the brain, they really don't know what you're talking about. You know, that's not their specialty.
Well, sir, I'm not a doctor, but I know if I eat a big bag of Doritos with MSG in it, I get a headache an hour later. And before I ever heard this stuff was bad, by the time I was a teenager, I started avoiding MSG. I didn't even know what MSG was. I just knew, don't eat Chinese food, don't eat Doritos.
Right. Well, you and millions of others made that observation while the physicians were denying it. And for decades, all the big journals, New England Journal of Medicine was denying there was any such thing as the Chinese restaurant syndrome. Well, now it's proven beyond all doubt, and we know that these exposures produce certain destructions of brain connections and the exact mechanism of what it does. For decades, they denied that monosodium glutamate entered the brain. Well, now we have absolutely proof it does enter the brain and produces these changes, particularly in the young during the most intense brain formation. Well, one of the effects of repeated intense vaccination is that it activates these cells in the brain that release glutamate in high concentration, producing the same effect, but even worse because there's an interaction of the immune reaction in the brain with the excitotoxicity, something that I coined the term immunoexcitotoxicity, which is now in the medical literature. And this is a major mechanism for most of your neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and Lou Gehrig's and Guillain-Barré and all of these things that we're now hearing about. Well, the interesting thing is the number of immunologic autoimmune diseases has increased, virtually exploded. The immunologists are all in a quandary is trying to figure out why, what has happened in the last 30 years that's triggered this incredible increase in every type of autoimmune disease, particularly those affecting the brain. Well, they've toyed with environmental factors. They say, well, there must be chemicals in the air or exposure to nanoparticles of diesel fuel, everything but the most obvious, which is vaccines. The number of vaccines in the last 30 years has increased just astronomically.
Because they can't point the finger back at, I mean, you look at these medical journals and reports, half the ads are drug ads and vaccine ads. Exactly. But as this is ravaging their own families, well, I mean, I know you're a brain scientist, a brain surgeon, a neurologist, but why is it linked to the diabetes in the literature? Why is it linked, I mean, conclusively from what I've seen and other medical doctors we've had on, to, you know, teenagers and young people getting really serious disorders of the joints and the arthritis? I mean, how is it doing that?
Well, it's the same autoimmune type reaction. Rather than the brain, it's attacking the cartilage in the joint, and it's attacking the beta cells in the pancreas, producing diabetes, and it's autoimmune reaction in the lungs, producing asthma. So all of these different diseases we know that are linked to these abnormal immune reactions are being connected to this immunization program, and the countries that have periodically outlawed certain vaccines, the incidence of type 1 diabetes and asthma has fallen precipitously. So we have very good circumstantial evidence of the connection to the vaccine policy. The problem is, as you say, they're advertising in all the medical journals. They contribute huge amounts of money for medical education and support of medical schools. They wine and dine residents and interns. I'm talking about pharmaceutical company makers. So there's so much financial influence throughout the media because of their heavy advertising on all the media that you can't get this story out despite the fact you have overwhelming hard scientific evidence of this happening. It's just like vaccine contamination. That is so well demonstrated, yet we just can't get that story out except through programs like yours, which is telling the people from the scientists and the scientific studies what we're seeing. Virtually every vaccine is contaminated, and the scary thing is contaminated with agents that can produce cancer and neurological diseases as long as 2 or 3 decades after, and even be transmitted to your offspring.
All right, doctor, stay there. That's incredible information. Medical doctor, literally trailblazed many of the modern medical terms being used. We're going to continue discussing what Dr. Blaylock is documenting here, what the vaccines, what the excitotoxins that are in our foods are doing, what's in our water, what the fluoride's doing, and then why he believes they're doing it. He has massive evidence about the eugenics. And I just really appreciate Dr. Blaylock spending time with us. The website is BlaylockReport.com. BlaylockReport.com. A bunch of invaluable papers and documents and articles and books available, and a special reports you can sign up for. I mean, this guy's the real deal. And, you know, again, I was reading stuff he wrote 10, 15 years ago, as he was saying, is now in the major medical journals, the terms he invented. Dr. Blaylock, you were starting, and this is a short segment, long one coming up, to get into the contamination of vaccines, not just what they're putting in there that you and others have proven is very bad and causing autoimmune responses and toxicity and other problems, but what happens in the manufacturing of it, and that a lot of these vaccines are grown on fetal retinas and caterpillar eggs and all sorts of other weird stuff.
Well, yeah, you know, in order to grow a virus, you have to have living tissue. The classic tissue was monkey kidney tissue. Rhesus monkey was the beginning. And then they used the African green monkey, and now they use other type cells. But all of these cells, if they're living, they're contaminated with other organisms, and they have inserted in their DNA carcinogenic viruses. They have mycoplasma. And a number of studies in which they took just vials of vaccines used for humans found a contamination rate varying between 30% and 60% for well-recognized organisms. Now, you have to realize that these kidney cells are contaminated with thousands of viruses, many of which have never been identified. So unless you're looking for a specific virus, you're not going to find it. We know that some of these viruses take a long time to culture out. You have to culture them for months to get this virus out. And one of the more recently recognized things is the stealth virus, which does not cannot be determined the usual detection mechanism. It takes a very complicated process to make these viruses show themselves. But the stealth viruses are being connected very strongly with cancer, neurodegenerative diseases, and a number of diseases that can come on decades after being exposed to them through the vaccines. So the potential of serious disease associated with vaccines is just enormous. Now, they have conferences on this all the time, but most of the conferences are closed door. They don't invite the media. They never release the results of this to the media. Sometimes you'll see it in the science magazines, for instance, like Science or Nature. And one conference I read about said that they admitted that